You've taken the country apart, you're not putting it back together. The violence that goes on at night, letting vigilantes and thieves out, will not correct the problems of Saddam's rule. All this is a bomb. If it explodes, it will be bigger than the war.
Generation Kill came out in 2008 at the midpoint of two defining American conflicts of the 2000s, the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan. These conflicts relied on journalists embedded with platoons to tell their stories and the truth of the war to the American public. Generation Kill was followed by Rolling Stone reporter Evan Wright, who also authored the book of the same name. The journalists allow for a more outside, observant view of the events and could take in all the criticisms that make up the anti-war messaging of the War on Terror. But on a small scale, these journalists weren't reporting on the entire war. It's one person, in one platoon, in one squad, in one location. Each location, battle, and area poses its own challenges. And Generation Kill is just one example of a broader scope of journalistic view of the Iraq War. It is the first 4 weeks of an invasion of a 10-year-long war. And half of the war isn't really a war. It's a civil war with insurgents. The war that we see in Generation Kill isn't what the war looks like a year later. We need to tell the story of the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War. And the best way to do that is through realism. The more real something is, the better it allows you to relate to the people there. Put yourself in their shoes and say, yeah, we definitely shouldn't do this anymore because war sucks. Generation Kill came out at a time where America was in a bad place. The recession, the upcoming election, we were transitioning from the Bush administration, Afghanistan is getting much worse. The public's perception of Iraq is at a point where nobody wants to be in this war anymore. Generation Kill is there to say, this is what war was really like. This is what aimless war is. Generation Kill allows us to understand not just the Iraq War, but the War on Terror. It enables the audience to understand the full scope of what it's like. It drops you in with no exposition. It's inaccessible for the average audience viewer with average knowledge of military speak. You practically need a dictionary to understand what they're saying half the time. But you are faced with the fact that these are our modern veterans. This is our war. This is the war we live with and have to deal with currently. We're not in World War II era anymore. People want to stay there. People love that history, where we defeat the bad guys and can maintain our national dignity. But we have to emphasize modern warfare. Is it fun to talk about? Not really, because you have to admit that America was wrong and didn't do anything meaningful in the War on Terror. Generation Kill is that statement. It's a critical lens through which you can see the truth of the Iraq War. It's just the beginning, yes, but it also encompasses the whole broader conflict. We are there, we don't know what we're doing, we interact with civilians on a rules of engagement basis. Whether we kill them or we don't kill them, it just depends. It depends on the day. Whether the men love it, hate it, or don't care depends on the person. It shows you all these different perspectives, and it's up to you to say, I agree with that person, or I disagree with that person, or I don't know what to think. That is the basis of how the truth of war should be told. War is like that. War is unfair. War is brutal. War is full of lies spun by the politicians and the media. That is true, but you have to ask yourself, why are we doing this? Generation Kill loves to ask this question. Why are we here? Why are we still here? When are we going home? What's going on? They're stuck there. You're stuck on this road trip with these guys. You can act like your friends and laugh at their jokes. You can be sad with them when they're sad, be angry when they're angry. You are in their group. How you interact with the environment is your choice, just like it's their choice. This is the new face of American war. The War on Terror was a colossal failure. It was useless. The Taliban is still controlling Afghanistan, and so many troops and civilians were killed for no reason. Journalism is essential in this aspect because it shows us these things unfiltered. We are an observer. We are part of the group, just like Evan Wright is. He is in the group. He's observing the war as a bomb. Generation Kill pulls the pin on the grenade and then throws the grenade. It's just the first step. It's not what happens after that grenade explodes. That is what the rest of the war is like. That is the War on Terror. Generation Kill is that example of pulling the pin. In Generation Kill, we're invading Iraq. After Generation Kill, it gets worse. That is the explosion. That is what the rest of the War on Terror is. I will analyze Generation Kill through its historical context, not through a filmmaking lens, as others have covered that for me. I will discuss the political background of the War on Terror, the Bush administration, Barack Obama, Saddam Hussein. I will explore the influence of early internet blogging on maintaining the veteran community during the war, and the treatment of veterans by the government post-war. I will discuss the role of the media in presenting the war. Generation Kill isn't just about Iraq, it's about the War on Terror and how we use it to learn the hidden truth. Important disclaimer, this video will include spoilers for Generation Kill and contain serious subjects such as suicide, mental health, death, crude language, anti-war, and anti-government sentiment. If you are sensitive to these subjects, or are a young viewer, please proceed with viewer discretion. This video essay will also go outside of the broad scope of the history of the War on Terror, since other people have covered it in a much better way than I possibly could. It is highly suggested you go into this video with prior knowledge of either Generation Kill or the War on Terror, though ample background will be provided for both subjects. All resources used in my research will be cited in the description and throughout the video. This video will contain many quotes, and all relevant text will be displayed on screen and spoken or read out loud by a character, person, or myself. Because this video will be long and people might listen to it instead of watching it, I will include this sound effect before text or an important scene will be on screen, if you want to digest the quote before I unpack it. With that out of the way, let's pull the pin.
Mama, we all go to hell. That was cool. Who do we invade now?
This isn't over, Ray. We don't even know when we started.
21 days. 21 days to take down an entire country.
In a recent talk with journalists at my university, one said, "You have to understand the big picture to understand what the small details mean." This is how I will present Generation Kill, a look at the small picture within the big picture, how it relates to the larger context of the War on Terror, and how it impacted the perception of the war at a time when it needed to be scrutinized. This is what Generation Kill and Evan Wright do. He drops us into the invasion with little preamble or introduction. We are there, unadjusted, alongside him. The show functions in the exact same way, a microcosm of a larger conflict. These are the small details. In Generation Kill, Evan Wright begins by explaining the concept of get some. The first episode of the show is even titled Get Some. Get Some expresses in two simple words the excitement, the fear, the feeling of power, and the erotic thrill that comes with confronting the extreme physical and emotional challenges posed by death, which is, of course, what war is all about. This quote encapsulates the Marines' mentality at the beginning of the invasion. They scream get some at any positive situation. During training in the first scene, when rolling through towns, when witnessing a cool explosion. It's their way of expressing excitement, but as the war drags on, the phrase begins to lose its original meaning. It shifts from being shouted at thrilling moments to being uttered when something truly horrifying happens. They say get some almost mockingly when an enemy is gunned down, when a civilian is caught in the crossfire. It evolves into a phrase of desensitization, as if to say, you deserve this. This shift reflects the trajectory of the Marines' experiences. What starts as adrenaline-fueled excitement turns into grim acceptance. The first episode, Get Some, perfectly captures this early stage of the war. The Marines haven't yet understood what war truly is. To them, it's still an exhilarating, powerful experience, but that perception will change. Wright's all-encompassing quote is, "These young men represent what is more or less America's first generation of disposable children." Before the War on Terror began, not a whole lot was expected of this generation, other than the hope that those in it would squeak through high school without pulling too many more mass shootings in the manner of Columbine. But since the 9/11 attacks, the weight of America's War on Terror has fallen on their shoulders. They see the invasion of Iraq as simply another campaign in a war without an end, which is pretty much what their commanders and their president have already told them. Some in the military see the War on Terror merely as an acceleration of the trend that started in the 1990s, America cementing its role as a global enforcer, the world's Dirty Harry. In Iraq, the joke among Marines is, after finishing here, we're going to attack North Korea, and we'll get there by invading Iran, Russia, and China. These young men represent what is more or less America's first generation of disposable children. Before 9/11, this generation had little expected of them beyond avoiding becoming the next Columbine shooters. It was the defining event of their youth, other than 9/11. They grew up in a time of teenage violence, and yet here they are, sent to commit state-sanctioned violence. Their one societal expectation, don't kill people, is completely subverted, as they are trained and deployed to do just that. 9/11 changed everything for them. They had nothing else to fight for before, and suddenly they bear the burden of keeping America safe. Most of them were sent to Afghanistan first, and when the Iraq invasion began, they saw it as just another campaign in an endless war. The joke about invading North Korea by going through Iran, Russia, and China is pretty telling. It reveals that the Marines themselves understood how arbitrary their mission was. They knew Iraq wasn't the final stop. They were simply cogs in a war machine, cannon fodder for the next geopolitical political conflict. They didn't care about the political justifications. They were simply there to serve. These were young men in their early 20s, disposable in the eyes of the government. This is a recurring pattern in US military history. Working class, minority, and underprivileged youth enlist for financial security, education, or escape from difficult lives. In return, they are sent to the front lines of America's wars. The War on Terror was no different. What unites the Marines is an almost reckless desire to test themselves in the most extreme circumstances. In many respects, the life they have chosen is a complete rejection of the hyped consumerist American dream. Instead of celebrating their individualism, they've subjugated theirs to the collective will of an institution. Their highest aspiration is self-sacrifice over self-preservation. There is idealism about their endeavor, but at the same time, the whole point of their training is to commit the ultimate taboo, to kill. Their culture revels in this. At the end of team briefings, Marines put their hands together and shout, "Kill." The Marines are not just rejecting civilian life. They are rejecting the consumer-driven, individualistic values of American society. They sacrifice themselves to something greater, an institution that demands total loyalty. In doing so, they willingly embrace violence, even revel in it. They joke about the horrors of war. They mock political correctness, social norms. This is how they cope with the realities of their job, to kill. At the beginning, during the Get Some era, the Marines are eager to kill. They chant about it, fantasize about it, and see it as a measure of their masculinity, strength, and loyalty, not just to the military, but to their brothers in arms. They imagine themselves as heroes, the ones who will save the day, put their lives on the line, and prove themselves as warriors. The institution reinforces this, making them shout "kill" as a mantra. But once they are given that ability, or the command, to kill, reactions vary. Some do it eagerly, some reluctantly, some out of total necessity. Others are deeply disturbed by it, feeling guilt and remorse. Despite being trained and conditioned for it, many struggle with the reality of taking a life. Their primary role as Marines is not diplomacy or humanitarian aid. It is to kill. Yet when faced with that reality, many find themselves unable or unwilling to do so. These Marines were sent to uphold an ideal, to bring democracy and liberation. But once there, they quickly realize that their mission is not what they imagined. Instead of being heroes, they are part of something morally ambiguous. In sacrificing their individuality to the military, they also sacrifice the American dream itself.
All religious stuff aside, the fact is, people who can kill will always be subject to those who can.
Brad Colbert is an especially compelling character. He's the Iceman, calm and collected, but internally he struggles with the war. Though he rarely shows emotion, moments like witnessing a mother mourning her injured son, shot by a Marine under his command, profoundly affects him. He feels responsible, even when he isn't directly at fault. Unlike others who joke about the war's absurdity like Ray, he takes it seriously, growing increasingly disillusioned. He and Nate Fick both question the war's purpose, feeling trapped in a system they can't control. They follow orders but wrestle with their morality, torn between duty and conscience. Ray, on the other hand, serves as the comedic relief. He's loud, opinionated, and sarcastic, constantly cracking jokes and making pop culture references. Initially, he embraces the get some mentality, believing in the mission and in the righteousness of America's cause. However, by the end, he too is disillusioned. Unlike Trombley, he never kills anyone. He's just the driver, the DJ, the guy who keeps spirits up. But after witnessing the war's brutality, he breaks down, overwhelmed by the violence. At the football game in the final episode, he can't handle the aggression and has to walk away, crying, displaying his complete emotional shift. Trombley, by contrast, is the embodiment of the killing machine the Marines are trained to be. He never shows doubt or remorse. He is there to kill, and he enjoys it. While his behavior is tolerated in war, the moment it ends, he is ostracized. His fellow Marines turn their backs on him, recognizing that his mentality is not something to be admired, but something war has created and enabled. In the final scene, as others return to their lives, he remains staring at the carnage alone, holding his weapon. He is what the war supports, what it fosters, and ultimately, what it leaves behind. Aspera and Lily offer another perspective. Lily, as the cameraman, captures the war's reality, while Aspera pushes him to film more, and later criticizes him for exposing too much. This mirrors how war is often covered by the media. Some want the truth hidden, while others want it documented. Aspera represents the military's desire to control the narrative, while Lily embodies the unfiltered reality of war. Generation Kill is not just about the Iraq invasion. It's about the young men sent to fight a war they barely understand, for reasons they don't question, because that is what they were trained to do. It's about a generation raised with little expectation who suddenly become the frontline enforcers of America's war on terror. And in the end, it's about the cost of that war, not just in lives lost, but in what it does to those who survive it. Generation Kill ultimately provides a raw, unfiltered look at the contradictions of war. It portrays soldiers not as caricatures of heroism, but as flawed, complex individuals navigating a morally murky reality. Some are hardened killers, some are disillusioned idealists, and some are just young men caught in a machine far beyond their control. In the end, war doesn't just change them, it reveals who they were all along.
Blood, gallons of the stuff, give them all that they can drink and it will never be enough.
The priest told me it's not a sin to kill if you don't enjoy killing. My question is whether indifference is the same as enjoyment.
Generation Kill offers a stark, ground-level view of the Iraq War, but to fully grasp its significance, we must step back and examine the big picture. As Joseph Steib argues, the threat of weapons of mass destruction was a cover story, a thin veil masking the administration's true objectives: to forcefully integrate the Middle East into a US-dominated liberal order of capitalist democracies, and to assert the US's right to remove regimes deemed contrary to its interests. The Iraq War, in essence, was an attempt to reshape the world on America's terms. The Bush administration's public justification for the war centered on the claim that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction. However, as CIA Director George Tenet revealed in his memoir, top admin members seemed uninterested in figuring out the details of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction programs. Tenet interpreted this as evidence that the administration had already decided to invade, using weapons of mass destruction as a mere pretext. White House Press Secretary Scott McClellan echoed this sentiment, admitting that eliminating the supposed weapons of mass destruction threat was primarily a means to achieve the far more grandiose objective of reshaping the Middle East as a region of peaceful democracies. In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, figures like Paul Wolfowitz argued for immediate military action against Iraq, despite Afghanistan being the clear priority. The administration became increasingly convinced that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction and was colluding with al-Qaeda. Even after UN inspections found no evidence of weapons of mass destruction, President Bush declared on March 17, 2003, "There is no doubt that the Iraqi regime possesses weapons of mass destruction." 2 days later, he authorized Operation Iraqi Freedom. Bush himself, in a moment of candidness, admitted to having difficulty controlling my bloodlust. Rumsfeld, meanwhile, saw Iraq as an opportunity to send a potent message to adversaries around the world, while Wolfowitz envisioned reordering the world. The initial invasion was swift, leading to the capture of Baghdad on April 9th. On May 1st, 2003, President Bush declared mission accomplished, proclaiming, "Because of you, our nation is more secure. Because of you, the tyrant has fallen, and Iraq is free." However, this victory speech masked the brutal reality of a protracted insurgency and a devastating civil war. The Coalition Provisional Authority was established, but the US forces remained in Iraq until their official withdrawal in 2011. Even then, the US maintained a presence, and in 2014 began a new campaign against ISIL, which had dramatically grown after the US withdrawal. Public opinion was initially divided. A January 2003 CBS poll showed 64% approval for military action, but also 63% support for a diplomatic solution. Media complacency, particularly from Fox News, which was the most popular cable channel covering the Iraq War and had the least amount of critical commentary, contributed to the pro-war narrative. By 2008, Bush's approval rating had plummeted, reaching a low of 19%. Generation Kill, airing during this period, served as a stark portrayal of the war's realities, further fueling public disillusionment. Obama's election and subsequent troop withdrawal reflected the shift in public sentiment. As Robert Draper noted, the decision to invade Iraq was Bush's alone to make, but he had an abundance of help. However, the reality on the ground, as depicted in Generation Kill, contradicted this grand vision. The Marines were not liberating Iraq. They were caught in a chaotic and morally ambiguous conflict. They lacked adequate resources for humanitarian aid, and their attempts to help were often thwarted by higher-ups. The Iraq War, fueled by false pretenses and a desire for dominance, left a legacy of disillusionment. As Steve Coll states, the war was driven by false claims of Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, the media's complacency, neoconservative hubris, and George Bush's choices. Generation Kill is a testament to this, revealing the human cost of a war built on lies and hubris. Generation Kill is more than just a war show. It's a historical document that exposes the gap between political rhetoric and the harsh realities of war. It challenges the notion of a mission accomplished, and underscores the enduring consequences of decisions made in the pursuit of power. It serves as a reminder of the importance of questioning authority and seeking the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Excerpt from Eli Came Back from Iraq, a poem by Andrea Gibson, written in January 2006. Tell me, what land of the free sets free its 18-year-old kids into greedy war zones, hones them like missiles, then returns their bones in the middle of the night so no one can see, their deaths swept beneath the carpet and hidden like dirt, their lives promises we never kept. Jeff Lacey came back from Iraq and hung himself in his parents' basement with a garden hose. The night before he died, he spent 45 minutes on his father's lap, rocking like a baby, rocking like, "Daddy, save me." And don't think for a minute he too isn't collateral damage. In the mansions of Washington, they are watching them burn and hoarding the water. No senator's sons are being sent out to slaughter. No president's daughters are licking ashes from their lips or dreaming up ropes to wrap around their necks in case they ever make it home alive. Our eyes are closed, America. There are souls in the boots of the soldiers, America. You want to support our troops, bring them home, and hold them tight when they get here. Generation Kill provides a fictionalized glimpse, but the true impact of the Iraq War is best understood through the unfiltered voices of those who lived it. My research led me to the early internet, to blogs and websites that served as outlets for soldiers and veterans to share their experiences. I delved into the Wayback Machine, uncovering personal blogs from the early 2000s. One example, a blog by a soldier named Mitch Meadows, offered a glimpse into the mundane and terrifying realities of war. Most posts detailed the routine: boring day, weather sucks, IED attack today, but I didn't know anybody. However, his New Year's Eve post from 2004 stands out. Well, a year has come and a year has gone. I know what it feels like to not be scared of a noise anymore. I know what it feels like to not have your family there. I know what it feels like to not be there for your family. And if there's one thing I learned this year, is that I could have lived without this. This post, with its honesty and vulnerability, inspired me to dig deeper. I found similar blogs, often serving as diaries for soldiers to update their families and friends. These were pre-social media outlets, a way to connect when mobile phones were less common. While many posts focused on daily activities, Mitch's reflection revealed a deeper truth. The war was not just action and excitement. It was fear, loss, mundane, and a growing sense of disillusionment. I was scared, and it's okay to be scared. My search led me to the Iraq Veterans Against the War (IVAW) website, initially a haven for Iraq War veterans. Founded in 2004, it later expanded to include Afghanistan war veterans. The site's evolution reflects the ongoing nature of the War on Terror. Browsing the site through the Wayback Machine, particularly a 2008 SITREP Situational Report newsletter titled News and Views for the 21st Century Warrior, revealed shocking truths. An article by veteran Christopher Goldsmith titled Veterans Screwed Out of Their Benefits, Lawsuit Reveals Suspicious Activity by VA Officials, detailed a lawsuit of the VA's deliberate underdiagnosis of PTSD. The article exposed how the VA, facing resource constraints, encouraged the diagnosis of adjustment disorder instead of PTSD. As the article states, Norma J. Perez, PTSD program coordinator and a psychologist at a VA center in Texas, sent an email with the subject line, "Suggestion," to several lower-level psychologists and social workers, saying, "Given that we are having more and more compensation-seeking veterans, I'd like to suggest that you refrain from giving a diagnosis of PTSD straight out. Consider a diagnosis of adjustment disorder. We don't have time to do the extensive training that should be done to determine PTSD. This is significant because adjustment disorder is considered a wastebasket diagnosis by psychiatrists and is subjective and is much less stigmatized than PTSD. The VA was prioritizing cost-cutting over proper care, denying veterans their rightful benefits. Dr. Michael Kussman, VA Undersecretary for Health, even stated that adjustment reactions are not mental illness, further minimizing veteran suffering. The IVAW site also highlighted the tragic reality of veteran suicide. The VA acknowledged at least 1,000 veterans under their care attempt suicide each month, and an average of 17 succeed. Christopher Goldsmith also included a personal account. After attempting suicide, he was dishonorably discharged for faking a mental illness, his misconduct dubbed a serious offense. My serious offense? Taking pills and trying to die comfortably, instead of having the intestinal fortitude to put a gun in my mouth and force my mother to bury her firstborn in a closed casket. Christopher Goldsmith only received 50% benefits from his diagnosis of PTSD and plantar fasciitis, and it took him almost a year to receive his first check. This story, and many others on the IVAW site, shows the institutional betrayal and the profound suffering of veterans. Beyond the articles and blog posts, the IVAW site also featured poetry and art. The poem, Eli Came Back from Iraq, which I read at the beginning, stood out for its raw emotion and truth. Another poem in the sitrep reads, "We are only pawns to them, just game pieces so they can win. These wars of pride we have fought for years. Not only the American people shed their tears." A black and white photograph of a Ferris wheel in Fallujah. The caption reads, "Dust-covered, but still colorful," juxtaposing the joy of childhood with the devastation of war. This paradoxical dichotomy captured the essence of Generation Kill and the war itself, a blend of humanity and brutality, hope and despair. This is illustrated in blog posts like "What Exactly Are We Dying For?" by Fat Jesus, written in 2006. The anonymous soldier questions the notion of liberation, describing incidents of firing at civilian vehicles and conducting indiscriminate searches. What would we as Americans do if our police engaged in any of these activities against us? Would we take pot shots and set traps, and in effect become insurgents too? This echoes the moral dilemmas faced by the Marines in Generation Kill, where the lines between liberator and occupier blur, and the rules of engagement are constantly questioned. The IVAW website, now a relic of the early internet, serves as a poignant reminder of the fragility of support and community for veterans. The site, now lost to a Korean gambling domain, once provided a vital space for veterans to share their stories, find resources, and build community. It was archived in 2021 and turned into the About Face Veterans Against War website, but it doesn't have that same community feeling that the early site did. The early internet and the IVAW website provide invaluable insights into the Iraq War experience. They reveal the struggles of soldiers, the failures of the system, and the enduring impact of war. But more importantly, they expose the struggle to define the truth of war. These voices, these disposable children, demand our attention and empathy. These sources demonstrate that the truth about war is not a singular monolithic entity. It's a complex, multifaceted experience, shaped by individual perspectives, institutional failures, and the psychological toll of combat. The VA's attempt to manipulate diagnosis, the cover-ups of veteran suicides, and the stark contrast between Bush's mission-accomplished rhetoric and the realities faced by soldiers all show the deliberate manipulation of truth for political and institutional purposes. The voices found online, in blogs, and the IVAW represent a counter-narrative, a raw and unfiltered truth that seeks to reclaim the narrative from those who would distort it. They remind us that war is not just a political event. It's a deeply personal and often tragic experience. The truth they share is not always comfortable or palatable, but it's essential to understand the true cost of conflict and hold those in power accountable. Generation Kill and these online voices correct official political and media narratives, urging us to question the truths we are told and to seek out the real experiences of those who have been directly impacted by war. They demand that we acknowledge the human cost, the institutional failures, and the consequences of decisions made in the pursuit of power, and that we remember that war is not just a battle fought on a field, but a battle fought within the minds and souls of those who experience it. Is there a way to truthfully depict war? Will there always be bias? How should we depict war? Should we dumb it down for the average viewer? Sugarcoat its brutality and violence? Depict the 20-something-year-old boys who go into this war as children and never grew up, as murderous killing machines, which they can be, but more often than not aren't, leaving the war scarred, abandoned, or in a box? Should we focus on the bureaucracy, the role of politicians, or the patriotic propaganda of the media? Maybe the pain of the civilians, innocent to the damage of their livelihoods, by nations fighting over sovereignty. There is no right way to tell war, especially when you are not the declared victor. There is no patriotic spin to put on the war on terror. In fact, we have chosen to forget about it collectively. Outside of Saddam Hussein hiding place and 9/11 memes that permeate pop culture, we have decided to ignore the war on terror. The war in Afghanistan ended 4 years ago, the Iraq War ended 14 years ago, and yet there are no history courses taught about it in schools, no political commentaries or criticisms outside of saying that was dumb. This is our generation's Vietnam, yet we talk about Vietnam much more. The War on Terror was a national embarrassment. It was an extremely deadly and expensive embarrassment. Generation Kill awakened me to the reality of the War on Terror and sent me down a rabbit hole full of political incompetence, journalism and the media, the rejection of veterans once they come home from the desert or the mountains, the tragedy of the civilian experience, the community of early internet blogging, and what it means to be truly anti-war. This research experience taught me more than ever about the War on Terror, and there is still so much more to learn. Has it taught me the truth of the War on Terror? That's impossible to say, but it has taught me several truths. What that truth is what you take away from it. Are we doomed to keep pulling the pin and watching it explode? Or can we someday remove the grenade?